There is a quiet but radical idea at the heart of this exploration, one that most people instinctively resist the first time they encounter it, because it challenges nearly everything they have been taught about how wealth is created and who deserves to have it. That idea is this: getting rich is not a matter of luck, not a matter of environment, not a matter of talent, and not a matter of choosing the right profession or being born into the right family. Getting rich is the result of doing things in a certain way. And because the laws governing that certain way operate with the same consistency as the laws governing mathematics or physics, anyone who learns to do things in that certain way will get rich, as surely and as reliably as 2 plus 2 produces 4. This is not a comforting spiritual metaphor. It is a practical claim, and the evidence for it is visible everywhere once a person knows what to look for. Consider how often two individuals begin in nearly identical circumstances, with similar education, similar opportunities, similar starting capital, and yet within a decade their financial lives look completely different. One has built something substantial. The other remains stuck, working harder than ever, but producing the same limited results year after year. The difference is almost never the amount of effort expended. Hard work alone, as millions of exhausted and underpaid people demonstrate every single day, does not produce wealth. Something else is operating in the person who gets rich, something in how they think, how they make decisions, how they relate to money and opportunity, and how they position themselves in relation to the creative forces available to every human being willing to use them. The first thing worth understanding is that wealth exists in the universe in essentially unlimited supply. This statement strikes most people as obviously false, because they have been trained from childhood to think of money and resources as a fixed pie, where one person getting more necessarily means another person getting less. This scarcity model feels intuitively correct because it matches certain everyday experiences, like competing for the same job or bidding against another buyer for the same house. But it is fundamentally wrong as a description of how wealth is created in the larger sense. Wealth is not found, it is created. Every significant fortune that has ever existed was created out of raw materials, ideas, and human energy being combined in new ways to produce something that did not exist before. The universe does not run out of raw materials, ideas, or human energy, which means the supply of potential wealth available to be created is genuinely without limit. This distinction between finding wealth and creating it matters enormously in practice, because it determines whether a person approaches their financial life from a posture of competition or a posture of creation. The person operating from a competition mindset is always trying to get more than their share of a fixed amount, which puts them in constant conflict with everyone around them and produces a baseline anxiety that actually impairs the quality of thinking required to build something lasting. The person operating from a creation mindset understands that their wealth does not come at the expense of anyone else, that they succeed by adding genuine value to the world rather than by outmaneuvering competitors, and that the universe actively supports the creative process when a person aligns themselves with it correctly. What does it mean to align with the creative process? It begins with thought. Not positive thinking in the shallow sense of repeating cheerful affirmations while ignoring real problems, but something deeper and more precise, the habit of holding a clear, vivid, and specific mental image of the life and circumstances one intends to create, and maintaining that image with such consistency and emotional conviction that it begins to shape the choices, conversations, and actions that fill each day. The mind is not simply a passive observer of reality. It is an active participant in the creation of the circumstances a person encounters, through the attention it focuses, the opportunities it recognizes, the risks it is willing to take, and the persistent effort it is able to sustain. Every physical thing that exists in the human world began as a thought. The chair you were sitting in, the building around you, the roads and bridges and communication systems that make modern life possible. Each of these was first a mental image in someone's mind before it became a physical reality. This is not a mystical observation. It is simply a description of how the creative process works. Thought precedes form. The consistent, emotionally charged, clearly detailed mental image of something desired is the first and most essential step in bringing it into physical existence. Not because thinking alone produces results without action, but because the quality and clarity of thought determines the quality and direction of the action that follows. Most people allow their mental images to be shaped primarily by their current circumstances, rather than by their intended future. They think about money in the language of their current bank balance. They think about their career in terms of what their current position allows. They plan their lives around what already exists, rather than around what they intend to create. This habit of thought keeps their experience circling within a very narrow range, because their actions, shaped by this limited thinking, consistently reproduce the same limited results. Breaking this pattern requires a deliberate and sustained effort to think from a different starting point, to make the intended future more mentally real and emotionally vivid than the current circumstances, and to hold that vision steady even when day-to-day experience provides no immediate evidence that it is coming to pass. This is genuinely difficult, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The mind has a powerful tendency to return to what is familiar, to default back to the habitual thoughts and assumptions that have shaped it for years or decades. Overcoming this tendency is not a one-time event, but a daily discipline, one that requires patience, consistency, and an understanding that the results of this inner work typically appear in the outer world with a delay. The gap between internal shift and external result is often where people give up, concluding that the approach does not work simply because the evidence has not yet caught up to the change in thinking. Those who persist through this gap are the ones who eventually look back and recognize the precise moment their financial life began to change, even though they could not see it clearly from the inside while it was happening. As we move forward into the deeper mechanics of this science, we will examine exactly how thought connects to action, why gratitude plays a surprisingly practical role in the wealth-building process, and how the specific way a person conducts their daily business, their transactions, their relationships, and their use of time either aligns them with or cuts them off from the creative flow that produces genuine and lasting prosperity. The principles ahead are not complicated, but they require a level of consistent application that most people are unwilling to sustain. For those who are willing, the results tend to be as reliable as the laws of nature, which is precisely what makes this not merely an inspiring idea, but a genuine science.
The connection between thought and physical reality is not as abstract as it first appears. It operates through a chain of cause and effect that is entirely visible once a person knows where to look. A sustained mental image of a desired outcome shapes attention, and attention shapes what a person notices in their environment. What they notice determines what they act upon. What they act upon determines what results they produce, and the results they produce over months and years of consistent effort directed by consistent thought accumulate into the circumstances of their life. This chain is not mystical, it is mechanical, and understanding it mechanically is far more useful than treating it as something reserved for the spiritually gifted or the unusually lucky. Consider the practical difference between two people walking through the same city on the same afternoon. One of them has been holding a clear and specific mental image of a business opportunity they intend to pursue. The other has no such image and is simply moving through the day reactively, responding to whatever demands present themselves. Both people encounter the same environment, the same storefronts, the same conversations, the same flow of information. But the first person notices things the second person walks straight past: a gap in the market, a potential partner, a resource that solves a problem they have been thinking about for weeks. The difference in what they perceive is not a difference in their surroundings. It is a difference in what their mind has been trained to recognize as significant. This is how thought shapes opportunity, not by magically summoning circumstances from thin air, but by determining which of the countless available circumstances a person is actually capable of seeing and acting upon. This is also why vague desires produce vague results. A person who wants to be financially comfortable someday, without specifying what that means in concrete terms or when they intend to achieve it, has given their mind no useful filter to apply. Their attention wanders without direction, noticing nothing in particular with any useful specificity. By contrast, a person who has decided, in precise and measurable terms, exactly what financial outcome they are pursuing and by what date, has given their mind a clear target to orient around. Their attention becomes selective in a highly productive way, consistently flagging the relevant and filtering out the irrelevant, which dramatically increases the rate at which useful connections and opportunities are recognized and acted upon. The role of gratitude in this process is something many people dismiss as sentimental, but it has a function that is entirely practical once properly understood. The mind tends to move toward what it appreciates and away from what it resents or fears. A person who spends the majority of their mental energy focused on what is lacking, what is unfair, what others have that they do not, is training their attention to scan for evidence of scarcity and disappointment, which is exactly what they will continue to find in abundance. This is not a punishment, it is simply how selective attention operates. Whatever the mind is trained to look for, it will find, because the environment contains evidence for virtually any conclusion a person is determined to reach. Gratitude redirects this process by training the mind to recognize and appreciate what is already working, what is already present, what is already moving in the right direction, however modestly. This shift in attention does something important. It keeps the mind in a receptive and creative state rather than a defensive and contracted one. A contracted, resentful, scarcity-focused mind is a poor instrument for creative thinking. It tends to see obstacles rather than possibilities, to interpret ambiguous situations pessimistically, and to shrink away from the risks that any genuine opportunity requires a person to take. A grateful, expansive mind operates differently. It approaches the same situations with a fundamentally different set of assumptions, sees more options, generates more creative responses, and is willing to act on possibilities that the contracted mind would have dismissed without serious consideration. Practicing gratitude in a way that actually produces these effects requires more than occasionally feeling thankful when something good happens. It requires a deliberate daily habit of acknowledging, in specific terms, the things that are already working in one's life and business, including the small things, the incremental progress, the relationships that support the journey, and even the challenges that are producing growth. This practice, maintained consistently over weeks and months, measurably changes the default orientation of the mind in ways that compound over time, gradually making the creative and receptive mental state more automatic and less effortful to sustain. There is another dimension of this process worth examining carefully: the relationship between a person's mental state and the quality of their interactions with other human beings. Virtually every path to financial success runs directly through other human beings, through customers, partners, employers, investors, or collaborators of various kinds. The person who approaches these interactions from a mental state of scarcity, competition, and anxiety tends to produce a particular quality of engagement, one that other people sense and respond to with wariness, even when nothing explicitly negative has been said.
Something in the quality of attention, the way questions are framed, the underlying assumptions being communicated through tone and posture, signals whether a person is coming from abundance or desperation, from genuine value creation or self-interested extraction. People are drawn toward those who make them feel genuinely seen and valued, and they move away, often without being able to articulate exactly why, from those whose interactions carry an undertone of anxiety or hidden agenda. This means that the inner mental work of cultivating a genuine abundance orientation is not merely a private spiritual practice with no practical consequences. It directly affects the quality of every professional relationship a person forms, every negotiation they conduct, every collaboration they attempt to build. The inner state produces an outer quality of presence that other people respond to in very concrete ways, ways that either open or close the doors through which financial opportunity flows. As we continue into the next stage of this exploration, we will examine the specific habits of action that translate this inner orientation into tangible, measurable results in the external world. Clear and consistent thought, combined with a genuine gratitude practice and an abundance approach to relationships, create the ideal internal conditions for wealth creation. But internal conditions alone are not sufficient. They must be paired with a particular quality of action, one that is neither frantic nor passive, but steady, purposeful, and always directed precisely at the goal that has been clearly defined. It is in this marriage of inner orientation and outer action that the science of getting rich becomes fully operational.
There is a particular quality of action that separates those who consistently produce results from those who remain perpetually busy without making meaningful progress. Most people, when they decide to pursue a significant financial goal, make one of two common errors. The first is the error of frantic, scattered activity, doing many things simultaneously with great intensity, but without clear prioritization or sequential logic, so that energy is constantly being expended but rarely accumulated into anything substantial. The second error is the opposite. Careful, prolonged preparation that never quite transitions into committed action, always waiting for one more piece of information, one more favorable condition, one more sign that the timing is right. Both errors feel from the inside like responsible and reasonable approaches. Both produce the same result, which is a great deal of motion without meaningful forward progress. The quality of action that actually produces wealth is neither frantic nor passive. It is what might be described as efficient and present tense action, doing with full attention and complete commitment whatever can be done today with the tools and resources currently available, without waiting for ideal conditions that may never arrive, and without dissipating energy across so many simultaneous efforts that none of them receive sufficient concentrated attention to develop real momentum. This sounds simple, and in principle it is. In practice, it requires a level of daily discipline that most people underestimate, because the temptation to add more tasks, pursue more opportunities, and hedge bets across multiple directions is extremely powerful, especially in the early stages of building something, when results are still modest and uncertainty is high. The discipline of doing today's work today, completely and with full presence, is grounded in a specific understanding of how results accumulate over time. Progress in almost any worthwhile endeavor does not happen linearly. It happens in a pattern that looks from the outside, and especially from the early stages, like very little is occurring, followed by a sudden and seemingly rapid acceleration once a threshold of accumulated effort has been crossed. This pattern is so consistent across different fields and different types of goals that it can almost be treated as a law of how complex systems develop. The person who understands this pattern is able to sustain consistent effort through the long early phase when results are minimal, because they know that the work being done during that phase is not being wasted, it is being stored, compounding invisibly, and building toward the threshold beyond which results begin to appear with increasing speed and frequency.
The person who does not understand this pattern interprets the slow early phase as evidence that the approach is not working and either abandons the effort entirely or dilutes it by simultaneously pursuing several other directions, which ensures that none of them ever accumulates sufficient concentrated effort to cross the threshold. This is one of the most reliable ways to spend years working hard and producing very little. Not because the goal was wrong or the approach was flawed, but simply because the effort was never sustained in one direction long enough and consistent enough to reach the point where compounding takes over. Connected to this principle of consistent, present-tense action is the question of how a person relates to the people they interact with in the course of their daily business. The science being described here is not a solitary practice that produces results in isolation from the social world. It operates through relationships, through transactions, through the ongoing exchange of value between a person and the community of people they serve. And the specific way that exchange is conducted matters enormously, both for the practical results it produces and for the internal alignment it either supports or undermines. The foundational principle here is straightforward. Always give more in use value than you receive in cash value. This sounds like advice to work for less than you're worth, but it means something quite different. Use value is the actual benefit a product or service delivers to the person receiving it. Cash value is the price paid in exchange. A book that genuinely changes how a person thinks about their financial life and produces thousands of dollars of additional income for them over the following years has a use value that far exceeds its purchase price. A meal that brings genuine pleasure and nourishment to a family has a use value that exceeds what the restaurant charges for it. When a business consistently delivers use value that exceeds its cash price, several things happen simultaneously. Customers return, they bring others with them, the reputation of the business grows organically, and the person running the business develops the internal confidence and external credibility that attract larger and more profitable opportunities over time. The person who consistently tries to extract maximum cash value while delivering minimum use value, who cuts corners, overpromises and underdelivers, and treats each transaction primarily as an opportunity for personal gain rather than mutual benefit, may produce short-term profits, but systematically destroys the relational foundation on which lasting wealth is built. More subtly, this approach poisons the internal mental state of the person practicing it, because extracting more than you give requires a fundamentally competitive and scarcity-based orientation toward the people you interact with, which is precisely the mental state least conducive to the creative thinking and genuine opportunity recognition that long-term wealth creation requires. Giving more in use value than you receive in cash value also has a specific effect on a person's relationship with their own work. When a person is genuinely committed to delivering exceptional value, they bring a quality of attention and care to their work that simply cannot be faked over the long term. This quality of attention tends to produce continuous improvement because a person who genuinely cares about the value they deliver is always looking for ways to deliver it more effectively, more completely, more elegantly. Over months and years, this habit of seeking continuous improvement compounds into a level of expertise and reputation that no amount of marketing or self-promotion could replicate. There is a practical daily exercise embedded in all of this that is worth making explicit. At the beginning of each working day, before responding to demands or diving into the task list, it is worth spending a few quiet minutes reconnecting with the clear mental image of the financial outcome being pursued, renewing the genuine intention to deliver exceptional value in everything undertaken that day, and identifying the single most important action that can be taken today to move the larger goal forward. This brief daily practice, combined with the habit of completing that single most important action before allowing the day to be consumed by reactive demands, produces a consistency of forward movement that accumulates into remarkable results over time, even when any individual day's progress seems modest and unremarkable.
As we move into the next section of this exploration, we turn to a dimension of the wealth-building process that operates largely beneath the surface of conscious awareness, but exerts an influence on outcomes that is difficult to underestimate. The way a person's deeply held beliefs about money, success, and their own worthiness shape the opportunities they pursue, the risks they are willing to take, and ultimately the ceiling they unconsciously place on their own achievement.
Beneath every financial decision a person makes, beneath every risk they take or avoid, beneath every opportunity they pursue or quietly talk themselves out of, sits a layer of belief that operates largely outside of conscious awareness. These beliefs were not chosen deliberately. They were absorbed during childhood and adolescence from parents, teachers, religious communities, and the broader cultural environment through thousands of small observations and repeated messages about what money is, where it comes from, who deserves to have it, and what having it or not having it says about a person's character and worth. By the time most people reach adulthood, these beliefs are so deeply embedded and so thoroughly automatic that they feel less like opinions and more like facts, less like assumptions and more like the way things simply are. The problem is that many of these deeply embedded beliefs actively work against the wealth-building process described in the earlier sections of this exploration. A person may consciously desire financial success with complete sincerity while simultaneously holding unconscious beliefs that tell them that wealthy people are greedy or corrupt, that wanting more than enough is spiritually dangerous, that people from their background do not build real wealth, or that success of a certain magnitude is simply not available to someone like them. These contradictory beliefs do not cancel each other out in a neat and visible way. Instead, they produce a subtle but persistent pattern of self-sabotage in which the person works genuinely hard and makes real progress up to a certain point, and then, just as a breakthrough seems close, makes a decision or series of decisions that pull them back to a level of achievement that matches their unconscious expectations rather than their conscious desires. This pattern is so common that it has been observed and documented across virtually every field in which people pursue ambitious goals. It shows up as the entrepreneur who builds a promising business and then, just as it is gaining real momentum, makes inexplicably poor decisions that undermine it. It shows up as the professional who gets promoted to a level of responsibility slightly beyond their unconscious comfort zone and then behaves in ways that justify their demotion. It shows up as the investor who makes a series of astute decisions that produce significant gains, and then makes one large, poorly considered move that wipes out much of what was accumulated. The specific form varies endlessly, but the underlying dynamic is consistent. Unconscious beliefs about what is appropriate and available for a person like them override conscious intentions at the critical moments when the gap between their current circumstances and their desired ones becomes most visible and most threatening to their sense of identity. Addressing this dynamic is not a matter of simply thinking more positively or repeating more enthusiastic affirmations. Those approaches operate entirely at the level of conscious thought and leave the underlying belief structure untouched. What is required is something more fundamental, a sustained and honest examination of the specific beliefs about money, success, and personal worthiness that are actually driving behavior, combined with a deliberate and patient process of replacing those beliefs with ones that are both more accurate and more supportive of the intended direction. The examination part of this process begins with observation rather than judgment. When a financial opportunity arises and a person feels an inexplicable reluctance to pursue it, rather than either forcing themselves to act or accepting the reluctance as reasonable caution, it is worth sitting quietly with the question of what specifically the reluctance is protecting against. What is the feared outcome? What does the unconscious mind believe will happen if this opportunity is pursued and succeeds? What belief about money, success, or personal worthiness would be threatened by achieving this particular goal? These questions, asked honestly and patiently without rushing to reassuring answers, often surface beliefs that have been silently governing financial behavior for decades without ever being consciously examined.
Once a limiting belief has been identified and named, its power begins to diminish, not immediately or completely, but measurably. A belief that has been unconscious and automatic draws its strength largely from not being examined. The moment it is brought into clear conscious awareness and evaluated against actual evidence rather than accepted as an unquestioned given, it loses the quality of inevitability that made it so constraining. A person who uncovers the unconscious belief that wealthy people are fundamentally different from them, that real wealth belongs to a category of human being they are not a member of, can then begin gathering conscious evidence that contradicts this belief, examining the actual backgrounds of people who have built significant wealth, and discovering that the pattern of ordinary origins and consistent application of specific principles is far more common than the mythology of innate superiority would suggest. The replacement process involves something more than intellectual counterargument, however. Beliefs are not purely cognitive structures. They are emotional and physical ones as well, stored in patterns of feeling and bodily response that have been reinforced over many years. Replacing them effectively requires regularly experiencing the emotional reality of the intended future, not merely thinking about it logically. This is where the practice of vivid, emotionally engaged visualization becomes most practically important. When a person regularly inhabits the mental and emotional experience of already living the financial reality they intend to create, holding that experience with genuine sensory detail and authentic feeling rather than an abstract concept, they are doing something neurologically real. They are building new associative patterns in the brain that gradually make the intended future feel familiar and accessible, rather than foreign and threatening. This process of belief replacement through repeated emotional experience is slow by the standards of immediate results, but it is far more durable than any technique that works only at the surface level of conscious thought. The old beliefs that currently limit a person took years to form through repeated experience and emotional reinforcement. Replacing them requires a similar process, sustained over sufficient time and practiced with sufficient consistency that the new beliefs accumulate enough emotional weight to override the old ones at the critical moments when behavior is actually determined. There is an important practical implication here for how a person should respond to the inevitable setbacks and disappointments that accompany any genuine pursuit of a significant financial goal. The automatic interpretation of setbacks as evidence that the goal is unachievable, or that the person pursuing it is not capable, or that the approach is fundamentally flawed, is precisely the response that the old limiting beliefs are designed to produce. These interpretations feel like realistic assessments of the situation, but they are actually the voice of the old belief system defending its territory against the new direction being pursued. Recognizing setbacks as a normal and even necessary part of the process, rather than as verdicts on personal capability or the viability of the goal, is not a form of denial. It is an accurate understanding of how complex achievements actually unfold, paired with the refusal to allow old limiting beliefs to use temporary difficulty as an excuse to abandon a direction that is fundamentally sound. As we move into the final stages of this exploration, we turn to the way all of these internal practices, clear and consistent thought, genuine gratitude, present tense action, a commitment to exceptional value, and the patient replacement of limiting beliefs, combine with the external structure of a person's daily habits and environment to produce the compounding momentum that eventually carries a person from where they currently are to the financial life they have been working to create.
There is a moment in the development of any serious wealth-building effort when the internal work described in the previous sections begins to express itself visibly in the external structure of a person's daily life. The mental clarity, the gratitude practice, the commitment to exceptional value, and the patient dismantling of limiting beliefs do not remain purely internal experiences indefinitely. They gradually reshape how a person organizes their time, designs their environment, chooses their relationships, and structures the daily habits through which their larger goals are either advanced or neglected. This outward expression of inner alignment is not automatic, however. It requires deliberate attention to the specific daily structures and environmental conditions that either support or undermine the consistent application of the principles being discussed. Most people significantly underestimate the degree to which their environment shapes their behavior independent of conscious intention. The books within easy reach, the people encountered most frequently, the default activities that fill unstructured time, the physical spaces in which most hours are spent, all of these exert a continuous and largely invisible influence on the quality of thought, the consistency of motivation, and the specific actions that feel natural and available at any given moment. A person who has done genuine internal work to shift their beliefs and clarify their intentions, but who returns daily to an environment that reinforces the old patterns, the same conversations about scarcity and limitation, the same passive consumption habits, the same physical and social context that surrounded their previous level of achievement, will find that the internal work produces far slower results than it would in an environment deliberately designed to reinforce the new direction. This is why deliberate environment design is not a superficial concern, but a strategic one. It begins with an honest assessment of which elements of the current environment are reinforcing the intended direction and which are working against it. This assessment should be applied to 4 distinct domains: the physical environment, including the workspace and living space and the objects and media that fill them; the social environment, including the specific people with whom most time is spent and the quality of conversations those relationships typically produce; the informational environment, including the books, podcasts, videos, and news sources that occupy the mind during uncommitted hours; and the temporal environment, meaning the specific structure of how time is allocated across the day and week, and whether that structure gives consistent priority to the activities most directly connected to the central goal. In the physical domain, small changes often produce disproportionately large effects on the consistency of productive behavior. A workspace that is organized, dedicated to focused work, and free from the visual clutter of unrelated demands makes it substantially easier to drop quickly into concentrated effort than a space that doubles as a storage area, entertainment zone, and social gathering point. The goal written and posted where it will be seen multiple times daily, rather than buried in a journal that is opened occasionally, makes it more likely that daily decisions will be made in alignment with that goal, rather than in reaction to whatever immediate pressure happens to be the loudest. These are not complicated interventions, but their cumulative effect on the consistency of aligned behavior over weeks and months is significant. In the social domain, the assessment required is more personally challenging because it involves evaluating relationships rather than objects, and relationships carry emotional weight that make honest evaluation uncomfortable. The relevant question is not whether a given person is likable or has good qualities, but whether the time spent with them tends to leave one more or less aligned with the direction being pursued. Some relationships are genuinely energizing and reinforcing, producing conversations that generate ideas, challenge thinking productively, and reinforce the belief that the intended goal is achievable and worth pursuing. Other relationships, regardless of the warmth and history they carry, consistently produce conversations that circle around complaint, comparison, and the comfortable shared assumption that extraordinary achievement is for other kinds of people. Both types of relationship have their place in a life, but deliberately increasing the proportion of time spent in the first category and decreasing it in the second is one of the most reliably effective environmental interventions available. The informational environment deserves particular attention because it is the domain in which most people exercise the least conscious control, despite its enormous influence on the quality of daily thought. The average person in the modern world is exposed to a staggering volume of information every single day, most of it consumed passively, and most of it selected by algorithms designed to maximize engagement rather than to serve any particular purpose the person has consciously chosen.
The cumulative effect of hours of daily passive consumption on the quality of thought available for creative and strategic work is substantial and almost entirely negative, not because any particular piece of content is necessarily harmful, but because the habit of passive consumption trains the mind toward receptivity and reaction, rather than toward the active, generative, directed thinking that wealth creation requires. Replacing even a portion of passive consumption time with deliberate engagement with material directly relevant to the goal being pursued produces a compounding effect on the quality of thinking available for that pursuit. A person who spends 30 minutes each morning reading deeply in the specific domain where they are building expertise, rather than scrolling through a feed of loosely related content, is accumulating specialized knowledge in the form that their mind can actually organize and apply, rather than absorbing a thin layer of general awareness across dozens of unrelated topics that evaporates almost immediately after exposure. The temporal environment, meaning the actual structure of how hours and days are organized, is where all of the internal and environmental work either gets translated into real-world results or quietly dissolves into good intentions that never quite materialize. The single most important temporal discipline for anyone building toward a significant financial goal is the protection of a daily block of time, however modest in length, that is dedicated exclusively to the most important work connected to that goal, scheduled at the same time every day, treated as a non-negotiable commitment rather than something that will happen whenever everything else is taken care of. Everything else is never taken care of. The demands that fill a reactive day expand to consume whatever time is available for them. Only what is explicitly protected and scheduled in advance actually receives consistent attention over the long term. This protected time block need not be lengthy to be effective. Even 60 to 90 minutes of genuinely focused, uninterrupted work on the central goal, conducted daily without exception, produces more meaningful progress over a year than sporadic multi-hour sessions conducted whenever circumstances happen to permit them. The consistency matters more than the duration, both because of the compounding effect discussed earlier and because the daily practice of showing up for the central goal, regardless of mood or external conditions, gradually builds a relationship with that goal that is qualitatively different from the relationship produced by occasional intense effort followed by long gaps of neglect. As we approach the final stage of this exploration, it is worth pausing to acknowledge something that has been implicit throughout, but deserves to be stated directly. The science being described here is not a fast path. It is not a system for producing dramatic results in a matter of weeks or even months, though early results begin appearing sooner than people expect once the principles are being genuinely applied. It is a framework for producing reliable, compounding, increasingly accelerating results over a period of sustained application, measured in years rather than days. The people for whom this science produces its most remarkable outcomes are not those who apply it intensely for a short period and then evaluate whether it has worked. They are those who understand its cumulative nature, commit to it as a permanent way of operating rather than a temporary experiment, and allow the compounding of consistent daily practice to carry them gradually and then suddenly from their current circumstances to the financial life they have been clearly and consistently working to create.
Every principle explored throughout this journey, from the unlimited nature of available wealth to the mechanics of thought, from the practice of gratitude to the discipline of present-tense action, from the patient dismantling of limiting beliefs to the deliberate design of a supportive environment, all of these converge at a single practical point that is worth stating as clearly and directly as possible. The science of getting rich is ultimately a science of becoming, not merely of doing. The external results, the financial circumstances, the accumulated wealth, the expanded opportunities, these are not the primary achievement. They're the natural and inevitable byproduct of a person becoming the kind of thinker, the kind of actor, and the kind of value creator that produces those results as a matter of course.
This distinction matters because it reframes the entire question of how to pursue financial success. Most approaches to wealth building focus almost exclusively on the external mechanics, the right investment vehicle, the right business model, the right market timing, the strategic moves. These things matter, but they are the final layer of a much deeper process, and without the deeper layers being properly developed, the external mechanics produce unreliable and often temporary results. The person who happens to catch a favorable market or stumble into a profitable opportunity without having done the internal work is likely to find that the resulting wealth either dissipates relatively quickly or produces far less satisfaction than anticipated because the internal capacity to sustain and expand it has not been built. By contrast, the person who has genuinely developed the internal capacities described throughout this exploration, who thinks clearly and specifically about what they intend to create, who maintains an authentic orientation of gratitude and abundance, who acts consistently and completely in the present moment, who delivers genuine and exceptional value in every transaction, and who has patiently replaced the limiting beliefs that previously capped their achievement, that person tends to produce financial results that are both more durable and more scalable than those produced by external strategy alone. And perhaps more importantly, they tend to find that the process of building wealth through these principles is itself deeply satisfying because it is aligned with their genuine capacities and their authentic contribution, rather than being a game of outmaneuvering others or exploiting favorable conditions. There is a quality of life that accompanies this way of operating that is worth describing explicitly because it represents something beyond the financial outcomes themselves. When a person is genuinely aligned with the creative principles described here, when their thought, their feeling, their daily action, and their relationships are all organized around a clear and worthy purpose, they experience a particular quality of engagement with their daily experience that is qualitatively different from the anxious, reactive, scarcity-driven experience that characterizes most people's relationship with their working lives. Problems feel less threatening because they are recognized as the raw material of creative solutions rather than as evidence of personal inadequacy. Setbacks feel less devastating because they are understood as the normal texture of any significant undertaking rather than as verdicts on one's worth or capability. Other people feel less like competitors to be outmaneuvered and more like potential collaborators in a creative process that has room for everyone who is willing to participate in it. This quality of life, engaged, purposeful, abundance-oriented daily experience, is not a reward that arrives after the financial goal has been achieved. It is available immediately, as soon as a person begins genuinely practicing the principles described here, even before any measurable external results have appeared. This is important to understand because it means the journey itself, not merely the destination, offers a quality of life that is substantially richer than what most people are currently experiencing. The person who commits to this science does not postpone living fully until the goal is reached. They begin living more fully the moment genuine commitment is made and consistent practice begins. As this exploration draws to its close, it is worth addressing one final question that arises for nearly everyone who engages seriously with these ideas. What if I begin applying these principles and the results take longer to appear than I expect, or the path turns out to look different from what I imagined? This is not a hypothetical concern. It is the normal experience of virtually everyone who has ever built something of genuine significance. The path almost never looks exactly as it was initially imagined, and the timeline almost always contains surprises, some slower than anticipated in certain phases, and some dramatically faster in others. The answer to this question is embedded in everything discussed throughout this journey. The goal, clearly defined and consistently held, remains fixed. The method, the specific path being taken toward that goal, remains flexible and responsive to real information gathered through genuine engagement with the world. faith in the outcome is maintained not through the absence of doubt, but through the daily practice of autosuggestion and visualization that keeps the emotional reality of the intended future more vivid and compelling than the temporary disappointments of the present moment. And persistence is sustained not through sheer willpower, but through the habits, the environment, the relationships, and the daily structures that have been deliberately designed to make consistent forward movement the path of least resistance rather than the path of greatest effort. The science of getting rich is available to every person willing to apply it. It does not discriminate based on current circumstances, past failures, educational background, or the opinions of those around you. It responds only to consistent, genuine, and patient application of its principles, rewarding that application with results that compound over time into financial circumstances that most people, looking at their current situation, cannot quite bring themselves to believe are possible for someone like them. That disbelief, examined honestly, is simply the voice of the old limiting beliefs making one final argument for the status quo. The answer to that argument is not a louder counter-argument. It is the quiet, consistent, daily decision to act as though the intended future is already inevitable, to deliver exceptional value today, to think clearly and gratefully today, to protect the time and the environment and the relationships that support the journey today, and to trust that this consistent daily practice, maintained with patience and genuine commitment, will carry you, as it has carried everyone who has applied it faithfully before you, all the way to the financial life you have been working to create.